Carbohydrates. The question of this video is, what are they? Where do you find in your diet? What actually is the structure of them, and what are the different types? So the goal here is to figure all that out. So now carbohydrates are going to be the major component of your diet. On average, you want about 50% carbohydrates coming in, because these carbohydrates nourish your brain, they nourish your nervous system, they're the energy for your cells. Now, that's within caloric limits, because if you eat too many carbohydrates, your body converts them into adipose or fat tissue. So it's about having enough, but balancing at the same time. Also, some other components of carbohydrates are the fibers, especially those indigestible fibers. We're saying if they're indigestible, what do I care? They help out your GI tract. They help out with your whole overall digestive process. Now we know that carbohydrates, specifically glucose, originally comes from plants. Plants go through photosynthesis, they take in water, they take in carbon dioxide, sunlight, the energy, they produce glucose. Now they can use that glucose to produce larger other carbohydrates. But us as humans, all of our carbohydrates have to be ingested. We can't just make carbohydrates. So those glucose molecules the plants make, we're going to ingest and eat those, and various other larger carbohydrates as well. But what really is a carbohydrate? Well, all carbohydrates are going to have the same basic ratio. 1 carbon, 2 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. So in the case of glucose, it's C6H12O6. 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. But all of our carbohydrates, no matter how small, glucose, or how large, are going to have that same ratio. So pretty much, what does a carbohydrate mean? Carbohydrate is a hydrated carbon. Carbo, carbon, hydrate, water, so it's a hydrated carbon. So pretty much you have carbons with water. That's really what they are. Carbon, 2 hydrogens, and oxygen. Now we know we need glucose for our bodies. That's been established in previous videos. We'll talk about more in this video. Glucose feeds the brain, glucose goes into our energy cycle. Glucose is a necessity for our systems. But when you start really looking at glucose, and for that matter, other carbohydrates, carbohydrates can either be considered simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates. In the case of simple carbohydrates, they are fast releasing. That means the body can break them down quicker, get the energy out faster. You can think of your fast carbohydrates, these simple carbohydrates, as sugars. Maybe you've heard the term simple sugars. That's what they're referring to. The other one is going to be complex carbohydrates. In the case of complex carbohydrates, that's more of a slow release. So your body's still breaking them down, but there's a slower process to get the energy out. A slower process to break them down into their basic building blocks. So let's start with the simple ones a little more. Your simple carbohydrates are going to be your monosaccharides and disaccharides. Now in the case of monosaccharides, mono meaning one, monosaccharides have 1 ring shape. Disaccharides, 2, have 2 rings that are bonded together. So these monosaccharides, 1 single ring. Some examples of these are going to be glucose, we've talked about. You also have fructose and galactose as 3 of the major monosaccharides. Now the disaccharides, 2 rings bound together. Some examples there are going to be maltose, sucrose, and lactose. All 3 of those are going to have 2 rings. So these are going to be your simple carbohydrates. The complex carbohydrates are mostly your polysaccharides. Poly meaning many, so polysaccharides are many of these ring-shaped structures all bound together. It could be 3 or 4, it could be 100 or 200 or several hundred. So it's all about how many then and how large the polysaccharide can get. Some examples of your polysaccharides are your starches, your fibers, and glycogen. Remember, glycogen is the storage unit of glucose. So those are your polysaccharides or your complex. Now, in the case of those simple monosaccharides, those simple disaccharides, a lot of times they are going to stimulate the sweetness taste factor of your taste buds. Now, this is the simplest of the taste buds to stimulate. And of the naturally occurring, fructose monosaccharide is going to be the sweetest of all of the monosaccharides and disaccharides. And I say naturally occurring because there are man-made or synthesized ones that are sweeter. But fructose comes in there. All right, let's focus on these monosaccharides for a second. In the case of the monosaccharides, that is the preferred fuel of your body. Specifically, glucose really is, because the other ones kind of get converted into glucose. So if you look at these, your brain, we know, needs glucose. You have to have a certain amount of glucose going to the brain consistently every day to fuel the brain. Galactose, another monosaccharide, isn't as stable as glucose. So that means galactose is going to be converted into glucose and therefore can be used as a fuel source. Really, the only difference here is there's a hydroxyl group, an OH, that is flipped differently on galactose compared to glucose. So your liver is going to convert that galactose, basically by changing where that hydroxyl group is, and make it into glucose. The vast majority of the galactose that's converted goes into your energy cycle, producing energy for your cells. So we're talking about ATP production, adenosine triphosphate. Another monosaccharide is going to be fructose. Now, the interesting thing about fructose is a 4-carbon ring instead of the typical 5. So glucose, galactose, they're a 5-carbon ring, but fructose is 4. Now, fructose is not going to be used as an energy source for our cells because our bodies just aren't going to metabolize that 4-carbon ring. Instead, what happens is the liver will metabolize it, not for energy, but it's going to help promote the synthesis and catalyzing the glucose uptake. So what this is going to do then is, as your liver processes and works on fructose, it's going to help glucose be pulled up in the liver and then stored or processed by the liver and sent out. So it's aiding in the glucose processing. Now, of these simple sugars, we're talking these monosaccharides, gone through glucose, galactose, fructose, but there are other sugars that are pentose sugars, pentose meaning 5. They're not quite as common, but they're found in DNA and RNA. DNA, deoxyribose, RNA, ribose, nucleic acid. This is your basically instructions of your body. So we're looking at 2 different sugars, deoxyribose and ribose. They make up your DNA and your RNA. Well, we can also look at a different one called sugar alcohols. Now, in this case, sugar alcohols do not naturally occur. Instead, sugar alcohols are going to be industrially synthesized from monosaccharides. What that means is we're making these for a particular purpose. These sugar alcohols are things like sorbitol, xylitol, as well as glycerol sometimes. What these are used for is they're replacing the naturally occurring sugars in foods. Why that can be beneficial is because these different sugars that were man-made, not naturally produced, so the sugar alcohols, they do not completely digest. What that means is, by not completely digesting, they do not absorb and be taken into our cells as efficiently. So therefore, they're lower in calories. Our bodies don't take them up, they end up excreting them out. Another benefit is the bacteria in our mouth are going to oppose them. What that means is, in your mouth, there's not as much of a cavity production because the bacteria aren't utilizing these different types of sugar alcohols. So there are some benefits to these, but again, they're not naturally occurring, so it's one of those back and forth. Let's jump into the disaccharides. In the case of the disaccharides, looking at two monosaccharides together, bound together. So looking at sucrose, lactose, and maltose as the three most common ones we want to look at. Let's start with maltose. Maltose is made up of two glucose molecules bound together. Now, this is going to be very common for breakdown of plant starches. But what's interesting is, a lot of times you don't find this in food as a disaccharide because it so quickly is broken down into the individual glucoses. So that's maltose. Sucrose is the next one. That's glucose and fructose together. So sucrose, glucose and fructose bound. Now in this one, think of table sugar. That is sucrose. So you've seen that around all the time, table sugar. You'll also find sucrose in a lot of your fruits and vegetables, especially in sugarcane. Sugarcane is very high in sucrose. All right, third one, lactose. Lactose is glucose and galactose bound together. Now lactose, that's your milk sugar. You'll find that in very different dairy products. So it's looking at your yogurts, cheeses, milks. So it's found in the dairy system. So maltose, sucrose, and lactose. All right, so that's monosaccharides and disaccharides. Let's move into the complex carbohydrates. In the case of the complex carbohydrates, these are your polysaccharides, so 3 or more, a lot of times many more, rings. They can either be single long strands or they can be branching and have many branches coming off. The branching or not branching is going to depend on what type of carbohydrate it is and what purpose it's serving. So one example was starches. If you're looking at starches, it's things like your grains, it's in your legumes, and it's in your root vegetables. Think potatoes. That's why if you ever boil potatoes, you notice the water becomes very starchy. That's all that starch being cooked out of potatoes. Some examples in plants you'll see are amylose. Now this is going to be a linear strand of glucose, as well as amylopectin. Amylopectin is going to be a branching series of glucose. They're both found in plants as a storage unit for glucose. So your plants are storing the energy in these two different types of polysaccharides. Now as humans, or animals for that matter, it's very hard to digest amylose and amylopectin. We just don't have the right enzymes to break them down. So what's happening here is, if you cook these different polysaccharides, by cooking them, you're going to break down the crystalline structures. And by breaking down the crystalline structures, you make it easier for us as animals to have our enzymes digest those polysaccharides. So it helps out in the cooking process to break them down. Another polysaccharide is going to be glycogen. Now we know glycogen is the storage unit for glucose in animals, in us. Glycogen is going to have many branches. It can have these huge amounts of branches all coming off. Glycogen is typically found in the liver and muscle tissue of your bodies. In the liver, simply being stored. Then from the liver, it can be sent out as needed for more glucose. But in the muscles, it's still stored, but the muscles will utilize all that glucose for their own actions. It won't be sent out in the body anymore. So in the actual muscles, that will be used only for that muscle. The liver, no problem, send it out as needed. So that is an example of glycogen, the storage of glucose. Remember, we've gone through glucose. You add a molecule of glucose, a second molecule of glucose. Every time you add that glucose, remember, it was 1 ATP. So if you end up having this 400 glucose structure for glycogen, that was 399 ATP molecules used to build that. So it might be a lot of energy to build it, but as you start to metabolize and break down those glucose, you can create many more ATP molecules than what was used to store it in the first place. Continuing on with the different complex carbohydrates, we're looking at dietary fibers. We know dietary fibers are still polysaccharides, and these polysaccharides can be branched and cross-linked. What that does is it's given them more structural integrity, making them more solid. It's one of the reasons why we can't very easily, if at all, break down dietary fibers. Look at things like pectin, the different gums that we have, not chewing gum, but gums as in plant-based gums, as well as cellulose. Now, cellulose, that's found in the plant wall. So there's tons of that when we eat plants. We're not going to be able to really break it down very much, though. That's why that's our dietary fiber. We don't have the right enzymes. So as we ingest this, we can mechanically chew it and break it down, but we can't really process it for absorption or to take it into our bodies. But what happens instead is, in the large intestines, the bacteria that are naturally found there, and these are good bacteria, they should be there. That bacteria that you have in your large intestines, they do have some enzymes that can break down these different indigestible fibers for us. So as they can break it down a little bit, that's going to help release some of that components that we need, but most of it's being passed on out. It's more helping the bacteria in the large intestines. And we want to help that bacteria because that helps keep us healthy, helps keep our digestive system working properly. So dietary fiber is important, even though we don't have the enzymes, those bacteria do. So you gotta make sure you're ingesting enough dietary fiber to keep everything moving and regular, as well as helping out those bacteria. Some health benefits, things like reducing your risk for cardiovascular disease, reducing the risk for obesity, because those dietary fibers have been shown to help flush things through the GI tract, reducing absorption of certain components that will help with risk factors. Now, of those fibers, they fall into two categories, either water-soluble or not water-soluble. In the case of water-soluble, you're looking at things like inulin, pectin, and guar gum. Those are found in things like peas and beans, oats and rye. So all those are going to be your water-soluble fibers, which we need. But we also need a mixture of the not water-soluble or the insoluble fibers. The insoluble fibers, things like cellulose and lignin. Those are found in your whole grains, they're found in flax seeds, they're found in various different components we're ingesting anyway. The idea is to make sure you have both those by eating a balanced and a varied diet. And of those fibers, we also need to talk about what are called functional fibers. Now, functional fibers are going to be actually added to the food we eat for health benefits. Now, these functional fibers, they can either be based on plants or they can be synthetically produced, basically man-made. But what the functional fibers are doing are helping to give us added benefits to the food. So it's kind of like fortifying the food, adding extra benefits to what we're eating. One example is the psyllium seed husk. In the case of psyllium seed husk, it's been shown and claimed to lower cholesterol levels. Now, this actually is a claim that the FDA has approved, saying, hey, we can prove this. There's enough evidence saying it helps lower cholesterol. So certain foods have this functional fiber, this psyllium seed husk added in to help give the benefit of added fiber and to help with lowering cholesterol. So overall, carbohydrates, monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides, have quite a few different benefits. But again, has to be taken in account of what your diet is. Too much of any of these could also be problematic. So it's about balancing, finding what works for you, enough energy for what you're doing, active versus sedentary, but not too much energy where that ends up with having these extra sugars, these extra monosaccharides being converted into fat. So it's about trying to find that balance, know where things are at. Carbohydrates, though, plenty of benefits as long as you can balance out getting all the different types and the different amounts. Until the next video.